Week 3 waiver wire additions and people to monitor going forward. Two things I wanted to note. Number one, I talked to a friend recently. He's in a very, very deep, big league. So I'm going to try and focus a little bit more on this video about talking about really low rostered people out there, because when I looked at his waiver wire, it was kind of gross, like really, really gross. So I want to make sure I'm trying to like help people out in deeper leagues as well. Number two, I challenge you guys to critically think, how are people able to actually watch these games at least once, if not multiple times, before doing this video for you on a Monday? Not shooting my shot at anybody, I'm just saying, I just find that to be crazy that nobody has acknowledged yet. Like, there's no way that people, unless they have a big team of people or multiple people on their social media channel, that they could be giving you actual advice from what they've seen on the tape versus just looking at the stats and being like, oh, these are all the guys who did well, the end. Just something critically to think about. So hopping right into it, at the QB position, the first one I have is Daniel Jones. I really was out on Daniel Jones in week 1. The matchup wasn't that hard. It was a very high scoring game. I reviewed the tape in week 1 and I was like, okay, he looked okay. He looked good, I guess. You could force me to say that, but it's Daniel Jones. Like, it's Daniel Jones. In week 2, against what will be a top 10 defense in the Broncos, Daniel Jones still played well. Did he have a dip in his production? Sure, but he played well. So if I could just take away his face, take away the name, Daniel Jones, and just watch the tape, which is what I did in week 2 objectively, I was happy with what I saw. I'm not saying, again, that he is going to be a smash play every week. I'm not saying he won't turn into a pumpkin again later on in the season. But right now, he's playing well. This is obviously the best team he's played on. Shane Steichen has it figured out for him. It's kind of easy because of all the wide receiver options and Jonathan Taylor playing well. This defense is not fantastic, so they're going to give up points, which means that Daniel Jones has to score points. The rushing touchdowns are there. The passing yards are there. I'm hopeful that as we get farther and farther into the season, for Daniel Jones' sake and for fantasy football holders of Daniel Jones' sake and people who are starting him, that he can continue to keep the touchdowns rolling through the air and on the ground consistently. But I think he's somebody that's worth rostering in your league. And if you're really, really bad at quarterback or in a really, really deep league and you had Joe Burrow or Brock Purdy or any of the quarterbacks that's gone down, I feel like he is somebody that is obviously worth rostering in your leagues and is probably somebody you could start going forward with a decent amount of confidence until the point in time where we see a couple of games in a row of him looking like he did in New York. So my second QB is Jake Browning for the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm sure his name's being thrown all over the place. When I look into like what he did back in 2023, if we take away the first 2 games that he played, he ended up averaging about 19 points per game at the QB position. I know it's not over 20, but it's close enough to 20. I'm not saying he's going to be amazing or fantastic, but if you're in a really deep league where everybody's already been scooped up and maybe you already had Joe Burrow, Jake Browning might not be a bad choice. Obviously, we saw him in his first week. His second week will probably be kind of rough too, but going into week 3 and week 4 of him starting, I would anticipate we see his play kind of elevate week over week over week. If that's what you end up seeing, he's somebody that's viable to start as a potential QB-ish one, fringe QB1 kind of guy. Again, don't have like the tape from 2023 to review personally. I'm just hopeful that Jake Browning is going to be serviceable after his second start. So going into his 3rd week, which would be what? Week 5, that he should be semi-viable in fantasy. And again, if you're down bad at the QB position and you're in a deep league, probably somebody worth picking up. At the tight end position, again, I said I wasn't going to finally tell you to pick him up until now because he's looked good for 2 weeks in a row. He is Spencer Rattler's safety blanket. At the tight end position, it is going to be Juwan Johnson. I still don't like the talent. I don't like the athletic ability. I don't like the Saints offense right now. It's going to get better as Spencer Rattler gets more comfortable, like he looked like in week 2 against the 49ers defense. Juwan Johnson could continue to be a viable option 1, 2, or 3 on this team. If he has touchdown equity, that's great for him too. We'll see what ends up happening as we go throughout the season, but if you're down again at the tight end spot, he's not somebody that's bad to pick up right now. He's still a tight end who's not rostered over 60%, so if he's out there and you're down bad at the tight end spot, he's probably worth a pickup, only because, again, it seems like he's just going to be Spencer Rattler's little easy check down safety blanket guy and has some touchdown equity on this team, so he is probably somebody that you're going to want to roster if you need some tight end production. Next for me is Zach Ertz. I talked about Zach Ertz last week. I'm going to keep talking about him. He is going to end up being a tight end 1 in fantasy football. He's not my favorite pickup this week at the tight end position. It is Juwan Johnson, and the only reason being is because of Jaden Daniels' knee injury. If Jaden plays, then he will continue to have touchdown equity on this team. He will still be viable as a tight end 1 in fantasy football every week that Jaden starts. If Jaden is not out there, it's really hard to start Zach Ertz because I don't know how much favor he's going to get from the backup quarterback on this team. But if Jaden Daniels is out there, Zach Ertz is obviously somebody, if you don't have a top 5, top 6 tight end, he is somebody who on a weekly basis has touchdown equity on this team, is a safety blanket for Jaden Daniels, and 2 weeks in a row has dropped the ball on a couple easy pickups that he would have scored even more points in week 1 and week 2 at the tight end position and would be probably somebody everybody would be talking about if they aren't already. Again, I said it in week 1, say it again in week 2. I'll tell you again in week 3, as long as Jaden plays, he's going to be somebody who should be a tight end 1 this year. He might only finish as tight end 9, 10, 11, 12, but again, it'd be better to have those points now and see if somebody else emerges later on in the season. So my next tight end for you is going again with that mentality of like deeper leagues, right? So it is going to be Isaiah Likely. He is rostered at the 26% mark in sleeper leagues. The reason why I'm talking about Isaiah Likely is not just last season, it's also what we're seeing this season. Mark Andrews on tape does not look good, does not look explosive. He is not getting targeted. He is not getting utilized realistically in the passing game. It's 2 weeks in a row where there are targets going around to other people who I think historically had less talent or less equity on this team from the passing game. But at this point in time, Mark Andrews looks like he's kind of just out of it. I'm not sure if he's injured. I'm not sure if he's not locked in. I don't know if it's age. I don't know what it is, but he is not involved and doesn't look like he's at all explosive on the tape through the first 2 weeks. When Isaiah Likely comes back, he could come back as early as this week, week 4, week 5. He's coming back sooner than later. I'm not saying he's somebody that you're going to pick up and start as soon as he comes back because it'll probably take a week or 2 for him to get in the flow of things. But when he gets back on the field, gets a couple of games under his belt, he could emerge as the 2nd or 3rd target earner on what is going to be a very explosive, very high scoring Baltimore Ravens offense. He's not being rostered. If you can throw him on your bench, stash him. I think you can probably put him on your IR slot if you have one of those right now too. I believe he's still not technically on IR, but he's out and going to keep being ruled out until he comes back. He might be somebody you can even stash there. If that's the case, I would pick him up, especially in deeper leagues, because again, Mark Andrews does not look good. They want to utilize their tight ends. I just think there's a reality where this is Isaiah Likely's like year, quote unquote, where he could pop off later on in the season after, again, the first couple weeks he's back on the field. I don't like that there's touchdown targets going to these random wide receivers who I don't think are that talented. I believe Isaiah Likely will soak up a lot of those targets and some of that touchdown equity. So he could be someone who's viable once he gets a couple of games under his belt to be more of a tight end 6, tight end 7 for you. And he could be a smash pickup right now before he starts getting rostered, because as soon as everybody is told he's coming back, his ownership is going to go up and up and up and up, and you very well might miss your chance on getting him. So at the running back position, it is still super thin, unfortunately. Trey Benson is rostered in 59% of leagues. He's probably not available in your league. But if he is, I did like that he was more involved in the passing game in week 2. I did like what I saw out of him when he caught the football. He looked explosive. If James Conner goes down or misses games, which we're never rooting for, but if that happens, he's going to be an RB2, fringe RB3 at the worst case scenario for you in those weeks that he starts. I know he's not getting a bunch of fantasy points right now, but if you can roster him, stash him on your bench, he is somebody that, again, if James Conner goes down, he is a viable handcuff for you in fantasy football. My other running back that I have, because I only have 2 this week, unfortunately enough, is Breakout. It's unfortunate because I thought about making a video about him and one other player before the games played this week because of some of the coach speak I had heard and some things that I was thinking about going into the week. I did not, because it's like, why am I going to make a 2-minute video for 2 players? So maybe that's my bad. I guess I could have made it short. It's not so much what he did in week 2. It's more of just thinking about what we've heard from Liam Cohen and kind of just thinking more and more about the Tank Bigsby trade. There's a possibility where Breakout ends up being more of like a Bucky Irving light. He could take over more and more workload, and they could reduce ETN's touches and increase his touches. If that ends up happening, he could be a viable guy for like a bye week fill-in. If ETN goes down or misses games, I think he's going to be in a good spot. I like the tape this week. He looked explosive running the football. I'm not saying that he's going to be as talented as Bucky Irving or anything like that, but he didn't look too bad in week 2. I liked what I saw. I'm not worried about the touchdown. I don't really care about the reception. It was more of how does he look behind the line. I thought he looked like a big running back, a bigger bodied guy than ETN is. Looked pretty powerful. It'll be interesting to see how he looks in week 3. If he's available in your league, I believe he's like 20-some% rostered. You're probably going to have to fight for him this week, unfortunately, because of what he did in week 2. So again, it's my apologies that I didn't talk about it in week 1 or make a short going into this week. So I apologize about that. That is my bad. Okay, so at the wide receiver position, I have a slew of people, some of which I'm going to go through faster, some of which I'll take a little bit more time on. The first guy who did not pop off in week 2, thank God, it is going to be Darnell Mooney. He's only 56% rostered, so he's probably not available in your league, but he might be. He had the same target share as Drake London in week 2. I looked at the data from 2024, was kind of surprised. In 41% of his games, he had 7 or more targets. In those actual games where he had 7 or more targets, he averaged over 18 PPR fantasy points per game. He didn't pop off in week 2. Again, thank God. So he should be somebody that if he's out there in your league, you should be able to pick up this week. Once the Falcons actually go up against an offense again that can score points on their defense, which we did not see from the Vikings in week 2, Drake London is going to be wide receiver 1, and Darnell Mooney is going to be the wide receiver 2. He had the same receiving targets as Drake London in week 2. I think he's going to pop off. He's somebody that is going to be viable in fantasy football as the season goes along. The next wide receiver for me is Joshua Palmer from the Buffalo Bills. In week 2, they didn't really throw the ball very much with Josh, as we saw, because it was a blowout game. He did have the same number of targets as Keon Coleman in week 2. The biggest thing with Joshua Palmer, they brought him over from the Chargers. He signed a new contract with the Bills. They need a more dominant option from the wide receiver position. I'm not saying that Joshua Palmer is this elite alpha receiver, but if he ends up being the wide receiver 1B or just straight up 2 option for the Buffalo Bills and is going to get consistent targets week over week over week and ends up getting some type of touchdown equity on this football team, he could be a viable person for you in fantasy football. Definitely someone I would recommend stashing on your bench, just like I did in week 1. The next wide receiver for me is Hunter Renfrow. He looked okay in week 2. Wasn't anything too crazy. I get that he had the touchdowns, whatever. I'm not worried about that. It's more the targets that I'm looking at. He was slightly behind Xavier Legette in week 1. He outpaced him in week 2. I think it could end up being where Legette just can't catch the ball consistently, can't stay in bounds, just isn't that elite. That Hunter Renfrow ends up being the wide receiver 2 on this Panthers team behind Tet. I'm not saying you necessarily want to have the wide receiver 2 on Bryce Young's team for the Panthers and have that whole situation going on, because it's going to be a lot of up and down weeks. We'll see what happens in week 3. It could swing back to Legette. It could just be Tet taking so many touches that nobody else is viable. I just don't know yet. I wasn't in love with the tape in week 2, but the targets are there. So again, you got to kind of follow the targets a little bit for these wide receivers, especially before they break out. I wouldn't have called Hunter Renfrow in week 1 because, again, he's an older guy. Wasn't super impressed with the week 1 tape either. So, again, not somebody I'm in love with, but somebody who may be viable, especially in these really deep leagues, to put on your bench and stash and kind of see what happens going forward with this Panthers team. So, my next wide receiver is Troy Franklin. This has all to do with the fantasy points in week 2 and the usage a little bit. So, wasn't in love with the tape. I'm very confused why he was getting so many schemed up touches for this football team. He did have a decent amount of targets in week 1. They carried over to week 2. I'm not certain if this is just like the boom week for Troy Franklin and there's going to be a lot of bust weeks to follow. Again, he's targeting as the wide receiver 2 option on this team, but I just wasn't impressed with the talent in year 1. I'm not that impressed with the tape through the first 2 weeks. So it's one of those, like, I have to talk to you guys about it because he popped off. So, like, he's probably somebody, especially in really deep leagues, you're going to want to pick up, because what if he is the wide receiver 2 for the Broncos team? One person to keep in mind, though, is Pat Bryant. Like, I talked about him going into the season. I think Pat Bryant will end up being the wide receiver 2 on this football team. But I could be wrong. And if that's the case, Troy Franklin could be that guy. But again, like I said, keep Pat Bryant in the back of your mind. Watch him in week 3 and let's see if he gets more and more targets. We'll have to find out. So the next guy out there, the wide receiver position that I talked a little bit about going into the season as a PPR scam, and he kind of showed up as a PPR scam in week 1, was Wan'Dale Robinson. The biggest thing for Wan'Dale, he's not a big yards after the catch guy, but he does not drop the ball very much when he gets targeted. If we can get off of Russell Wilson, we get to Jackson Dart as the starting quarterback, he could be a viable like flex fill-in for you as we get later into the season, especially if when Jackson Dart does take over, this passing game elevates and Wan'Dale Robinson actually gets a few more targets, and they're a little bit more quality targets than what we saw in week 1. So for the next 2 wide receivers, they play for the Packers, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks. Jaden Reed, broken his collarbone, going to be out till November. Somebody is going to have to be the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 1B on this football team. It could end up being that Matthew Golden finally emerges in week 3. Just haven't been as impressed with him. I know some of the throws to him from Jordan Love haven't been that great, but some of those also, he could have came back, could have tried to fight to catch the ball. He didn't do so. Again, he's a rookie, so no stress on that portion of it. So maybe he emerges in week 3. But one of these 2 guys, I feel like at the worst case scenario is going to be like the 1B option behind Golden if he emerges in week 3. I don't know if it's going to be Dobbs. Don't know if it's going to be Wicks. I know for both of them last year, they kind of did the roller coaster thing the entire season. So I'm not saying that there's somebody you're going to feel great about starting if they pop off in week 3 going forward. But it is somebody, again, in deeper leagues, they're viable to put on your bench stash and see what ends up happening in week 3 from Jordan Love and this passing offense for the Green Bay Packers. Another deep league stash, and I talked about him going into the season, and I said I was very disappointed because of Devontae Adams. I do like, obviously, Devontae Adams. I like the pickup for the Rams, but it is Jordan Whittington. He is somebody that if Puka or Devontae go down, he is going to be the number 2 options on this explosive Rams offense. He is probably not somebody you have to roster right now, but if you hear Devontae has a weird injury, Puka has a weird injury, and they're potentially going to miss time, or you see a pretty gruesome injury on the field, he is somebody who other people probably won't talk about going into that next waiver wire week. Could be somebody who's realistically pretty dang viable in fantasy football. He is explosive. Again, if Devontae didn't come over, he was going to be somebody who's like a late round guy who had a lot of faith in. The next wide receiver is Alec Ayomanor from the Tennessee Titans. The usage is there. He's a wide receiver 2 for this team. If Cam Ward gets it more and more figured out as we go throughout the season, and he likes Ayomanor more than Calvin Ridley and is going to target him the same or maybe even more as we go forward, he could realistically be a fringe wide receiver 3 during those weeks when Cam Ward's like on, and this offense has it figured out. If you want to pick him up now because you're in a really deep league, he might be worth a bench stash. Again, the targets are there. The production's not 100% there currently, but if he ends up outpacing Calvin Ridley in targets and he ends up becoming the favorite target earner from Cam Ward, he could be a viable guy later on in the season. Last year, I wasn't doing fantasy football on YouTube. I did call out Juwan Jennings. I picked up Juwan Jennings. I had him for the 46-point PPR week. Again, I'm not saying this guy is going to be Juwan Jennings and the next week he's going to have 46 points. I'm not saying that. But I am saying this is how I felt about Juwan Jennings last year watching tape through the first couple of weeks where I was like, ooh, he might be somebody worth picking up. I did. And then it was, ooh, all these injuries happened and he was worth playing. The player that I'm going to talk about again, I'm not saying you need to pick him up. I'm not saying you need to roster him. I'm not saying you need to do any of that. You're not going to hear anybody else on YouTube talking about him because, again, can't do waiver wire videos on Monday because there's not enough time to watch tape. If you didn't watch tape, you're not going to talk about this guy. And if somebody out there is talking about him, please let me know. I would love to know. I want to go subscribe to their channel too because obviously they're watching the tape. So the wide receiver I'm talking about is Torrey Horton from the Seattle Seahawks. I liked how he looked on tape. He is a rookie, so we do anticipate he will play better and better throughout the season. He's not going to outpace Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's not going to be the wide receiver 1 on this football team. Not whatsoever. It is probably going to take an injury to Cooper Kupp for him to end up being like the legitimate wide receiver 2 on this football team. Cooper Kupp, unfortunately, and again, we're not rooting for injury, but Cooper Kupp has a history of getting injured in the NFL. I'd be shocked if he stays healthy the entire season. I hope he does, for all you Cooper Kupp holders out there. But if he goes down, Torrey Horton is somebody who is going to emerge as the wide receiver 2 on this football team. He had another deep target in this game that Sam Darnold overthrew him on. Had he caught that ball, there is a potential he could have broken just one tackle for a touchdown for like 70 yards or whatever it would have been. And then all of a sudden it would have been, oh, do you guys know about Torrey Horton? He's a smash, blah, 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 blah. So I'm happy that didn't happen. Because again, I had to review the tape to actually see it. So not saying somebody you have to roster, but somebody to monitor. If we hear that Cooper Kupp has an injury, it's going down, Torrey Horton at that point in time is somebody who's worth picking up and stashing on your bench if Cooper Kupp goes down. If Cooper Kupp doesn't go down, if Jackson Smith and Jigba never goes down, if they're both healthy the entire season, forget about Torrey Horton. We'll talk about him next year, maybe. He could be absolutely nothing in fantasy football. But again, these are the kind of things that I want to talk about because if something like that happens, he could be viable for you and he could be somebody that nobody saw coming and somebody that you picked up if there's an injury in accordance with the time that you're picking him up. Something to keep in mind as we go throughout. All right, so those are my waiver wire pickups for week 3 in fantasy football. Hopefully this video helps you get just a little bit closer to winning your fantasy football championship in 2025. If you guys are looking for my tiers and rankings videos, those will come out sometime during this week. I will have those videos down here somewhere once that comes out. If you're watching this video a little bit later for some reason, that's completely fine. But if you are, they'll be down here so you can watch those as well if you feel so inclined. Hopefully I'll see you guys again. No, hopefully you guys will see me again real soon. And until then, y'all have a blessed day.